then it's appropriate to have the actual quote, and which could be a paragraph. But you want to make one slide for each point because that'll keep the presentation focused and moving forward, and it prevents the audience from moving ahead, right? You do want to try and make your slides dynamic. And by that I mean you have some flow diagrams or possibly even an animation to help control what the audience sees. And you can have GIFs or something else, or animations, or even little movies embedded in your presentations. But again, you know, restraint is the watchword, because it can also come off as a little too much and distracting. And depending on your field or your audience or the customary practices that your audience is used to, it could come off as amateurish or unprofessional at worst. So what you want to do is engage your audience, but not turn them off. And there is a fine line. And this is where having some peer input is going to help you. So you make a presentation, or as you're making it, seek and solicit input from your friends or colleagues who can help have a fresh set of eyes on what you are doing. So for example, there are a lot of things that can distract one's presentation. There's incoming messages, there's people are in their living rooms, there's family members coming in and out of the room, there's maybe roommates, or if you're in a public space, you're in a cafe, there's lots going on. So you want to convey messages redundantly. In other words, you want to share your messages through multiple channels. So if we were going to present this particular slide in a presentation, it is something to do with liver biopsies. How do you convey this? You know, what would be your approach? So this effective redundancy technique is basically to use multiple channels of communication, visual, textual, and verbal, to express the same message. So, for example, you will want to convey your message in the title, written as a slide title, and then you will also be speaking the words, you know, the use of flow cytometry for the analysis of liver biopsies showed X, Y, and Z, right? And then you also want to show the data textually, right? And label your figures appropriately. And then, of course, the data is shown graphically. So you have people are reading it, they're hearing what you're saying, they're seeing the chart. There are multiple sensory inputs for you to convey your message. So that's redundancy. Now, let's talk a little bit about data visualization and infographics. This is one of the most famous so-called infographics ever made. It was made by a statistician named Charles Joseph Menard in 1869 to describe Napoleon's campaign from Poland to Moscow in the War of 1812. And then this is ostensibly a map showing the, let's see, do I have a highlighter? Let me show. Okay, so this is showing the map, the route that Napoleon's army followed from Poland to Moscow, but it's also showing something else. The width of this line is proportional to the number of soldiers in his army. So we started out with 400,000 soldiers in his army at the beginning of the campaign. But the width of this line is narrowing as various battles ensued during the fall of 1812. Finally ended up in Moscow with 100,000 troops remaining. And then on the campaign back out of Moscow, out of Russia, through the winter of in 1812, or through the fall and into the winter, his army was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking until he ended up finally with only 10,000 soldiers left. And so this conveys this kind of multiple amount of information in one graphic. It also shows some flanking maneuvers here. There was a regiment that went off over here and then returned. There was another regiment that went off over here and then looped back. And the bottom part of the chart, we also see the temperature was graphed at each point during the campaign. And you can see the temperatures dropping as he got into December, showing the environmental conditions that the Army was suffering as they went back. So this is one example. Now, we might also be able to do even better than Menard's statistical graphic. The slide, remember the slide with the test tubes and the fluorescent antibodies a few slides ago? What if we animated that illustration like this, and we showed the fluorescent dye going in, and the chemical reaction was important to show? We could animate that in a nice way like this. So this one shows the same thing as Menard's map, but we can actually see the animation with the same technique, using the width of the line to show the size of the Army in a very captivating way. So another important infographic was, here, I'm going to zoom in, whoopsie daisy. I'm going to zoom in on this part. This was a chart done by Dr. John Snow, the father of modern epidemiology, to show the source of the cholera outbreak in London. And he mapped the incidence of cholera cases in a neighborhood of London, and each line represented one case, and he placed them in the houses around the neighborhood where the outbreak was occurring. And then he figured out that this pump, there was a common water pump in the street at the time, and all of these cases were kind of located around the pump. And it was a famous piece of epidemiology to show how epidemiology can work. And this was one of the most famous infographics ever made as well. So this kind of thinking about how your slide can convey complex, dense information is covered by a statistician by the name of Edward Tufte. And I do recommend that you take a look at some of Edward Tufte's work if you get a chance. Slide design. So again, minimal and necessary text. So you want to have each slide representing just a few ideas. Make sure your animations are relevant and not distracting. Your font is easy and large to read. You want to stay away from slides that are too text heavy and that contain the long sentences. And we've talked about the font size and those kinds of things. Now, in terms of the content, you want your research and ideas discussed in a compelling and cohesive way. You want to give examples, case studies, some real world applications. It's kind of the, answer the, what does this matter question clearly. So like, why should people be interested in this? The implications and the applications are discussed. It's finding the right mix of good content, interesting presentation, good communicative graphics and text, structured nicely so that people can follow what you're saying. Again, just to repeat, you want to review and edit your presentation. Use some stories or some quizzes or short videos. You've done your spelling and grammar checks. The language is clear. You've used shorter and simpler sentences. In presentations such as this, your sentences don't even have to be really grammatically correct, in my opinion. You can leave out words. You can even leave out articles like the. You can just basically omit them to save space and keep your text count low. Let's see. So while I was making this presentation, and this is another thing, there's kind of a forest and trees problem as well. when you're making your presentation, you're kind of way deep into one slide and you're spending hours and hours making one slide. You lose the fact that it's one slide in a series. So I realized that I needed to have a slide talking about the forest and trees problem when I was looking at my my deck, and so I inserted it here, and so now the slide is one slide longer because I wanted to remind you all of this forest trees problem. So just a couple slides on overcoming the challenges of when you're about to present. These are just, you know, basic ideas for any public speaking opportunity. You know, breathe, catch yourself, calm yourself down. You want to optimize the lighting ahead of time, get your background together, and check your sound, and motivate yourself by imagining, you know, an interested audience. And these are folks who I would like to spend time with. I would like them to be spending time with me. Set the camera at eye level, like I've done here today. Ensure that you have a good signal and stable internet connection. Just all of those basic things you want to talk about. Use a background that enhances your image. Like here today, I've got books in the background and some artwork up on the walls. You can still swivel it around. You know, nothing too crazy that would interfere with what we're doing. I've also got 3 screens right now. I've got right in front of me, I've got the camera screen, and then to my right and left, I have supplementary screens so that I can see what's going on. I can see the dashboard with the control panel as well. How to keep your audiences engaged. All right. So basically, these are just a bunch of additional tips for how to keep your audience engaged. You know, you're so interested in your research and your findings or your idea, but you want to somehow translate your enthusiasm and interest into something that would be of interest to them. So are you offering a solution to something that they might also need or would like to know about? Are you sharing some information about a new technique or technology that will help them do their own work faster? It's not about you and your work necessarily. It's about how your work fits into a larger context of growing your field, growing the literature, expanding everyone's horizons, and moving the ball forward for everyone at the same time. You want to, again, convey your excitement through a number of different means. Tell your story again, the introduction, the body, the concluding comments. Use transitional phases to help with the flow. So now that you have seen, as you now know, as I've just shown you, based on our findings, we then proceeded to do, you know, X, Y, and Z. Or in other words, you can structure the flow of your conversation to help them follow what you're saying. So, so some additional points about repeating your points, and then again, tell them what you're going to say in your introduction. Then during the body of your talk, you tell them, and then in the end of your talk, you summarize and tell them what you said. Have fun and be yourself. And there's no cookie cutter right way to do this. You could have 10 people, like, you know, doing this same talk, and you would get 10 different styles, right? So just be yourself while you're doing it. Now, we haven't talked about this yet. This idea of breakout rooms and forming smaller discussions and generating discussion. Some conferences are really into this, and they facilitate breakout rooms and small discussions later on, and that is something to participate in, and if you have a chance, because this is where you do have a chance to do some networking yourself. You want to combat distractions by giving people so-called wayfinding signals as to where we are in the talk. We've been doing it today by these little returning to this agenda, and then you can see at a clip, where we are in today's talk. And then here's another example here by the guys using an arrow to show you where we are in his talk. So use something like that as well. You can engage your audience in other ways by using polls and posing questions. That's another way. You want to keep your voice loud and clear and distinct. Deliver your pace somewhat slower than usual, if you, than you might think is correct, to help people follow what you're saying. And if you make a mistake, don't panic. It doesn't matter, right? It's for minor slip-ups or bloopers. Just correct yourself and keep on going. Don't make a big deal out of it. No one else will if you don't. All right, and then just shrug it off and keep going is the best advice. All right, how to answer Q&As. So, of course, as we did today, we set some ground rules. We said we're going to ask questions at the end. Other folks like to have questions, right away. And when I was at the University of Chicago, there was the culture there was to allow and almost to welcome early and frequent interruptions. So it was very often the case that after 1 or 2 slides, people would start asking questions. That's how engaged they were in the topic. But it's your choice, and you are the presenter. You do get to set some of the ground rules yourself. Above all, treat the audience with respect and answer their questions directly and honestly. Try not to lose your temper. It won't do anybody any good, even if it's provocative or challenging. You're the presenter, you're in charge at the moment, and you do get to control the room to some extent. And try and leave the presentation on your own terms. You want to listen to the questions, because the quality of the questions will sometimes give you feedback as to how good your talk was. How well did they understand it? Say if you're giving the same talk in multiple venues, pay attention to the questions that are asked, because that will give you some ideas about what you need to correct in your talk for the next time. There are some, you always want to make sure that you understand the question, and so you can ask them to repeat the question. That's okay. Ask them to rephrase the question if you don't understand it. It's okay. Ask them to clarify it in one way or another. And then always begin with a polite comment. It just shows that you're interested. What a thoughtful question. I'm glad you asked that. Listen carefully. It's okay not to know the answer. You can say, I don't know, or I'll look into it, or that's the subject of our next piece of research, and I'll be glad to talk about that next year when I come back, when we've done that piece of work. So there are a lot of ways to answer questions without it being defensive or backing them into a corner. They just want to be engaged. I'm going to skip that one. These are all some tips for getting through the question and answer period, but I do want to keep on moving. Networking is going to be important. Scan the attendee list. Look at the list of folks who are potentially going to be at the conference. This is important. Make a LinkedIn profile or a profile on your favorite social media platform that's professional, so that if people see your name pop up and you're saying something interesting, they can look you up in real time on the side, and they can Google you, and there will be some good content out there about you, and of course they can of course, always connect with you through those other social media platforms as well. Some other tips about the private messaging features as well. And Sneha mentioned that they were going to offer some discount on future webinars. So take a look at that, and I hope you would join some future Inago event or take advantage of some of the services there as well. So that's all. We're going to open up the question and answer session now, and thank you very much for listening in, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you, Dr. Hougham, for such a wonderful and informative session. We are now open to take questions. We request all the attendees to kindly send us their queries using the questions tab on the control panel.
Shoot me your questions.
Yes, I will start with the question first. I also want the record, okay, how do you animate the map?
That is a GIF slide. So GIF slides are made by combining a series of individual images into one image that will automatically generate the animation for you. So that's .gif, and there are GIF utilities, free apps out there online, so that you can upload, let's say you have 10 images, you upload your 10 images into the GIF application, and then it will return one image for you that you then just embed into your presentation just like a regular image. And then it will, as soon as you click on that image, it will generate the animation automatically.
All right. The next question is how to overcome panic during presentation.
Yeah, that's a big one, and we all get butterflies in our stomach, and I'd be lying if I said I don't get butterflies from time to time, depending on the situation. Having a drink of water handy is always a good idea. Having a buddy with you, having someone just sort of to give you that final hug as they send you out to the podium is a good idea. But generally, the idea is there's really no reason to be so panicked because the stakes are usually far lower than you might think. There'll be another chance if you mess it up. There'll be another chance, generally speaking, for you to make another impression. So never say never.
The next question is, what slide template websites do you recommend?
Oh, I didn't talk about slide templates that much. That is a very good question because there's no sense necessarily in you needing to reinvent the wheel. I mean, there are templates out there, and even PowerPoint itself has some templates. I don't have a particular one that I go to all the time, but I should say that at this point in my career, I have my own library of talks that I can pick and choose from myself. But the idea of using a template generally is a very good one, and there are lots of different backgrounds and structures that you can choose from. So I guess I will just have to say I don't know a particular one, but I do know that there are many good ones out there.
All right, moving on. How advisable is it to add effects to the text? Example, not having all the text appear at once, but having each bullet point appear with an effect.
Yes, That's a very good question as well. You might have noticed that we did do that in today's talk occasionally. We did it only a few times, and that's my tip, is that if you are going to use it only a couple of times. I personally find it distracting and too much. I would just rather keep things simple. So when in doubt, keep it simple. That's my advice for most of what we're talking about.
All right. Could you please repeat the name of the animate picture site? That is the GIF site.
I did not mention a particular site because I don't have a particular one that I always use. But if you just go on your favorite browser or Google search and type in, free GIF generator, you will find one.
Next question. Some online conferences offer pre-recorded presentation and online presentation. If there is such option, which mode would you recommend?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you repeat that again, Sneha?
Yes. Some online conferences offer pre-recorded presentation and online presentation. If there is such an option, which mode would you recommend?
I see. Okay. I would recommend the online presentation because it's a lot more fun and it's a lot more interactive. Now, it could also be the case that they would like to have a pre-recorded version of your talk as well. And so if you have the option, I would say to choose both. Have one that you've prepared in advance that you can upload, but then if it's possible, I would say to do a live one if they will allow you to do that as well.
Thank you. The next question is, what is your opinion about PPT animation?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that for me?
Yes. What is your opinion about the PPT animation?
About the PowerPoint animation? Yes, it's, as I said, I think it's fine to do a little bit of it. And the tools in PowerPoint are very good and solid and stable. Now that's the good thing about using one of the larger applications is that it's very well supported and the tools are robust. Now there are other tools and for making very interesting presentations, and so you can explore other ways of presenting your data besides PowerPoint. But that is the most stable one, and I recommend that you start with that one to begin with.
The next question is, do you think the same topic or study can be presented more than once?
Well, that's a tricky question because generally speaking, in academia, if you give the same content talk about a scientific finding, it's generally somewhat frowned upon if you give the exact same talk at two different conferences, right? Because people will just wonder if you're recycling your work. Why didn't he add something fresh? Why didn't she talk about this other part of their work? So it is a little tricky. Now, if you're doing a talk like we're doing today, which is more of a didactic talk or a talk about a particular technique or procedure, then sure, you can repeat it as many times as you want because there's no reason for it necessarily to be changing. And because you're not running a new experiment to talk about, you're not doing a new statistical analysis that you want to share with anyone. So I would say, generally speaking, I would be very careful about repeating the exact same talk at two different conferences.
All right, the last question would be, thank you for your presentation. I appreciated how you kept your energy level high during the session. How do you regroup if you realize your presentation might be too high or low for your perceived audience?
That's a good question, and that is, boy, not sure how to answer that because sometimes it's going to take a kind of a radical sense of awareness on your part that that's happening. All right, for you to catch it in the middle of a presentation would be very unusual, I think. Now, it is possible that that you would find it and notice it. Just shift, I would say, just shift your presentation, and if there are slides that are too technical for your audience, for example, it would be okay to just skip over a slide, and you just say, oh, I'm going to skip that slide for today, and just keep going. They won't care. And then, or you could just say something very general about it, like, oh, that slide showed some other result. But we don't have time for it. You know, I would say there would be a way of adjusting the pitch, the level of your talk, without insulting the audience. Because if you change it too radically, you run the risk of insulting them, right? Like, oh, we're not smart enough for this. So that's a very tricky question, and it's worth more discussion, but that's a start of an answer.
All right. As mentioned earlier, we have exciting discount offers for our webinar participants. The details of the discount will be shared via chat box. Thank you, Dr. Hougham. Our attendees have certainly gained a lot of critical information from this session. We would once again like to thank all our attendees for joining the webinar. Please find the discount codes for our editing and publication support services in the chat box. We would also request you all to please fill the feedback survey displayed after you leave the webinar. Your participation will allow us to evaluate the effectiveness of our webinar. Have a good day. Thank you, Dr. Hougham.
Thank you. Bye-bye.